Hey everybody, I'm Joe, and this is Grounded in Fact. So picture this. You wake up early, put on your work clothes, you clock in. You work 8 hours on your feet, bagging groceries, caring for somebody's elderly parent, stocking shelves, answering phones. At the end of the week, you sit down, you pay your bills, and the math just isn't math. That's the reality of thousands of Oklahomans who work full-time and earn less than $15,100 a year. Here's what $7.25 an hour actually gets you in Oklahoma City. After rent on a one-bedroom apartment, you have $357 left for the month. Not for fun, not for savings, for everything. For food, for gas, the light bill, kids' inhaler, daycare, everything. Folks, this isn't a budgeting problem. This is a wage problem. And that's what we're going to talk about today. A math problem that hundreds of thousands of Oklahomans are living inside of right now. To understand why this matters, let's go back to understand why the minimum wage was created. The minimum wage is a New Deal era policy established through the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 as a direct response to the Great Depression, when about 25% of all workers were unemployed and people lost everything. Congress built it to do two things. One, protect workers, and two, to stimulate the economy. The idea was simple. Make sure working people can survive and make sure they've actually got enough in their pockets to actually participate in the economy, go out there and buy something. Those two goals have always been linked. But the first minimum wage is 25 cents an hour. And when opponents said that it would destroy American businesses, they were wrong. The economy grew. Jobs expanded. For decades, as the cost of living went up, the minimum wage went up with it. The most recent federal minimum wage increase happened on July 24th, 2009. That was 17 years ago. Despite numerous efforts since, there has not been a single federal increase, with 55% cumulative inflation since 2009. That $7.25 wage has lost its purchasing power. Now, here's how to think about that. Rent, groceries, utilities, they've all increased by more than 50%. The minimum wage check never got bigger, but all of the bills did. The whole point of minimum wage is that it keeps up with the times. In Oklahoma, it hasn't moved in 17 years. As of 2026, the average state minimum wage across the United States is $11.51 an hour. Oklahoma is still at $7.25. That's a $4.26 gap between what Oklahoma pays and what the average state pays. Over a full-time work year, that gap amounts to more than $8,800 in missed wages for a single worker. 30 different states have raised minimum wage above the federal floor. States like Missouri, Nebraska, and Arkansas, which look a lot more like Oklahoma than California does, they've all done it. And here's what makes Oklahoma's situation especially appalling. The state's own employees are now required to make at least $12.41 an hour, under a law tying state worker pay to federal poverty guidelines. So Oklahoma's government looked at its own workers and said, you deserve enough to live on. And yet it refuses to do the same thing for the rest of its workers. And when cities tried to fix this themselves, Oklahoma passed a law forbidding cities and towns from setting wages above the state rate. So I'm going to slow down for a quick second to get really concrete here, because I think that when the numbers pile up, they start to blur together and they can sometimes lose meaning. Look, at $7.25 an hour, working 40 hours a week, you bring home about $290 a week before taxes. After federal taxes, you're looking at about $260 in your pocket. A gallon of milk right now is close to $4. A dozen eggs, about $3. So on just those two things, two staples that most households buy every single week, cost you about an hour of work at minimum wage. Even in the cheapest county in Oklahoma, a full-time worker needs to earn nearly $20 an hour just to cover a modest basic standard of living. At $7.25, Oklahoma's minimum wage falls short by $12.75 an hour. That's $26,500 a year. Minimum wage workers are being paid less than 40% of what they need to be able to afford to live. And that's in the least expensive part of the state. Now I want to hear directly from somebody who put a number on what it actually feels like at the moment.
Hey, it's Jackson with Yes on Raise the Wage. Today we are going to be seeing how many hours you would have to work on minimum wage to buy a tank of gas. Let's go.
The wage hasn't been raised in nearly 2 decades now, while rent, groceries, and utilities keep rising. Around 200,000 kids in Oklahoma will have a parent who gets a raise if we vote yes on State Question 832. Now, with the minimum wage being $7.25, the hours worked to afford this tank of gas is around 9.4. That's crazy.
9.4 hours to fill up your gas tank. just to get to work, just to do it all over again. 9.4 hours. That's just one tank of gas. This is not just an economic issue. It is a justice issue. And I want to be really clear about what we're talking about here. When people hear minimum wage worker, they picture a teenager working a summer job. That is not who we're talking about here. Nearly 82% of workers who would benefit from raising the minimum wage in Oklahoma are 20 years old or older. More than half are working full-time. These are adults. These are parents. Women make up almost 2/3 of the workers who benefit from a minimum wage increase in Oklahoma. Workers of color make up about 1/3 of the state's total workforce, but nearly half of those in low-wage jobs. Researchers are clear. The disparity is a direct outcome of decades of discrimination. And here is something that almost never makes it to the headlines. Several categories of workers are currently exempt from the minimum wage, including tipped workers, farm workers, domestic service workers, and part-time employees. All these exemptions can be traced back directly to historic and systemic racism. They were written to exclude specific groups of people from economic protection, and they have been sitting in Oklahoma law, largely untouched, ever since. The exclusion of tipped workers from minimum wage protection is a relic of slavery, from back on a time when recently emancipated Black voters were overwhelmingly pushed into service jobs that relied on the generosity of customers rather than a guaranteed wage. That history did not stay in the past, got written into law, and it is still here. You cannot talk about wages and economic opportunity in Oklahoma without talking about Tulsa's Black Wall Street, one of the most prosperous Black communities in American history, destroyed in 1921. That kind of economic violence does not just disappear, it compounds. For generations, higher wages alongside strong non-discrimination laws are part of what it takes to begin to address that. So what do you do when your legislature won't act? You go around. In the summer of 2024, a citizen-led ballot initiative collected more than 157,000 verified signatures. That's 65,000 signatures more than required, with plenty of time to make it to the ballot in November of 2024. The Oklahoma State Chamber of Commerce and the Farm Bureau filed a lawsuit immediately to try to kill it. The Oklahoma Supreme Court then ruled that SQ 832 was legally sufficient and could move forward. Then, despite all of that enthusiasm, despite all of those signatures, delays, certification pushed those measures past the deadline. So in September of 2024, Governor Stitt set the vote for June of 2026, meaning that Oklahomans have waited nearly 2 full years to actually get a chance to vote. June 16th, 2026 is the date. If passed, SQ 832 would raise the minimum wage to $12 per hour in 2027, $13.50 in 2028, and $15 an hour in 2029. Beginning in 2030, it would increase every year with the cost of living, so it can never fall this far behind again. And it goes further than just the number. SQ 832 eliminates the exemptions for tipped workers, for farm workers, for part-time employees, and for domestic service workers, job categories shaped by discriminatory history. So if SQ 832 passes, more than 300,000 workers would see their wages rise. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the combined population of Norman, Edmond, and Bourne. And then there are the kids. 200,000 children in Oklahoma would have a parent that gets a raise if SQ 832 passes. 200,000 kids whose family has a little more breathing room, a little more stability. Maybe a parent who isn't working a second job on the weekend. Maybe a fridge that actually stays full through the end of the month. Now, I want to spend a quick minute on the opposition. They're going to tell you it kills jobs. They're going to tell you small businesses will close. They're going to tell you that the whole economy will fall apart. They said every single one of those things in 1938, and they were wrong then. A 2024 working paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research found that the vast majority of minimum wage studies show no job losses or only small effects, and minimum wage policies have unambiguously raised the total earnings of low-wage workers. Unambiguously. That is their word, it's not mine. And look, the opposition loves to compare Oklahoma to California. Oklahoma has 4 million people. California has 40 million, and it's the 5th largest economy in the world. That comparison is not serious, and it shouldn't be treated as serious. States that actually look like Oklahoma, in Missouri and Arkansas, New Mexico, Nebraska, they have successfully raised their minimum wages. And here's a number that I keep coming back to. From 1996 to 2025, there were 32 statewide ballot measures to raise the minimum wage across the country. Voters approved 28 of them. That is an 87.5 approval rate. People actually get a chance to vote on this. They say yes, almost every single time. Minimum wage was built as a promise. A promise that if you show up, if you do the work, you will be able to survive. that you will not have to choose between rent and groceries, that your kids don't have to go hungry because you did everything right. Oklahoma has been breaking that promise for 17 years. There's not a single county area in the entire country where minimum wage workers paid enough to meet the requirements of basic family budget on their wages alone. Not one. That is not an Oklahoma-specific failure, but Oklahoma has a chance to do something about it on June 16th. The people of Oklahoma have already shown what they think about it. They showed up, they signed a petition twice over, and they won in court. They survived a 2-year delay. A minimum wage worker in Oklahoma right now has to work over 90 hours a week to afford a one-bedroom apartment. Nobody should have to work 90 hours a week to keep a roof over their head. Nobody. If a full-time job is enough to live on, that's not a personal failure. That is a